I gladly introduce our champion for governor, Howie Hawkins.
Thanks everybody for coming out, and thank you for the introduction, Betty. You know, I looked at the monument of Eleanor Roosevelt when I came here, and it looked like she was thinking. And I think if she was here today, she'd be asking the question I am. With Democrats like Andrew Cuomo, who needs Republicans?
Hey! Amen.
Cuomo is echoing the Republican calls for a cap on state spending and taxes. And what that means is deep cuts for our schools and colleges, our parks, our health care, all public services, state aid to local government, and the prospects for an economic recovery. Cuomo's fiscal policy, along with Obama's freeze on all federal discretionary spending except for the military, shows that the Democrats have completely purged the New Deal legacy that's carried them and made them popular over the decades. It's gone now. And I think maybe that's what Eleanor Roosevelt would be thinking about. What happened to the New Deal? Cuomo, like every other gubernatorial candidate, major and minor party, in this election, except the Green candidates, is taking us back to the Depression economics of Herbert Hoover. It's a recipe for a vicious circle of debt and depression, with consumers and businesses over-indebted and unable to increase demand in the economy. It is only government that can restart the economy by spending. But they're calling for a cap on spending. As the employment numbers out Friday showed, private job creation is falling behind the natural increase in job seekers as the next generation comes into the job market. The spending and tax caps will only increase the deficits and the debt, as economic stagnation leads to further reductions in tax revenues, further cuts in public spending to balance the budget, and thus further economic decline, further revenue decline, further cuts. That's the vicious circle of depression and debt. This is the economic agenda of the big Wall Street bankers. They've convinced the politicians that they bought that instead of taxing the rich up front to pay for public services, they'll lend us the money and we get to pay them interest for it. And that works for a while, as long as the deficit's about 3% of GDP and the debt is no more, the accumulated debt no more than 60% of GDP. But we've reached that point now. And the rich want to get paid back. The bondholders are demanding that working people pay off their debts by taking cuts in public services, and for the public workers, cuts in their pay, their benefits, and for some of them, their very jobs. They're projecting 16,000 teachers are going to be laid off, and that's just the beginning this year in New York. But we see the state's fiscal crisis as contrived by the politicians on behalf of Wall Street interests that finance their campaigns, because the state government had the money last year and they gave it back. They got $16 billion in a stock transfer tax and automatically rebated to Wall Street. Now they're facing a $9 billion deficit. If they'd have just kept the $16 billion, they'd have had a $7 billion surplus. There's no fiscal crisis in terms of money in the state. It's a matter of who pays. Are the rich going to pay their fair share of taxes, or are they going to squeeze us dry? That's the issue. Our Green campaign is offering the only alternative to this dismal economic future for average New Yorkers. We say it is time to end 3 decades of repeated tax cuts for the rich as a failed policy. Instead of stimulating the real economy of labor and production, as advertised, this policy has only transferred wealth to the rich, who are speculating short-term in financial assets, basically rearranging paper claims to existing assets, income from those existing assets, instead of investing long-term in productive assets and business expansion. And that's what we need to get out of this economic recovery. We propose instead to make the rich pay their fair share, to finance public services and revive the economy, a position that Cuomo and the Republicans have explicitly rejected. They reject raising taxes on the rich. They said it in just so many words. We want to keep the stock transfer tax in that $16 billion. We want to restore the kind of progressive personal income tax New York State had in the 1970s. If we had that today, we could cut the income taxes of 95% of New Yorkers and still take in $8 billion more in revenue. We want a 50% banker's bonus tax on cash bonuses over $50,000 on the over $20 billion that Wall Street is handing out for their performance in 2009, which was paid for by the taxpayers in the biggest transfer of wealth in world history. The bailout by the Treasury Department, TARP, and all kinds of programs through the Federal Reserve. That banker's bonus tax would raise another $10 billion. Put those three together and the state would have well over $30 billion surplus. And with that $30 billion, we could fully fund our schools. We could put the unemployed to work in public works and services, like the Works Progress Administration did during the Depression. We could make our community colleges and CUNY and SUNY tuition free, like Collier was talking about. We could restore the 8% share of state revenues that are supposed to be shared with county and municipal government, but which they exempt themselves from every year. And with that, state and county and municipal government could give property and sales tax relief, the most regressive taxes we have. And we could invest in a sustainable green economy, which is what we need for economic recovery and a sustainable environment. That's what we call the Green New Deal. We would finally fulfill the full intent of the New Deal in the original draft of the Social Security Act, which not only provided income and pensions for the poor and the old and disabled, but also proposed a program of full employment, the right to a job, and universal health care, a single-payer national health insurance plan. But we would go even further. The next step in the Green New Deal is economic democracy, cooperatives, public enterprises, and above all, a state bank. Because the Wall Street banks, as I explained before, are not investing in the real economy, they're speculating. And if we're going to have a sustainable green economy based on renewable energy and mass transit and clean manufacturing and organic agriculture, we're going to have to take control of a sector of finances and invest it there. And that's what we need the state bank for. We have an example in North Dakota, which they've had a bank since 1918, the Nonpartisan League got in, and it has turned a profit every year since then. And it's financed the state's farms, businesses, their college student loans. And North Dakota today is one of only 2 states that doesn't face a budget deficit. Their unemployment rate is under 4%, while the rest of the country's right near 10% according to the most narrow measure of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We think the Bank of North Dakota has something to do with that state's economic vitality, and we want to use that example here in New York. So it all comes down to the basic issue. We can continue to have a state government run by Wall Street and the big bankers, by the big bankers, politicians in both of the old parties, or we can have a state government for average New Yorkers, and that's what the Green Party stands for.